The winter of 1873 came early to the Montana Territory, bringing with it a fury that even the oldest trappers couldn't recall. Snow fell in thick curtains across the pine-covered mountains, while winds sharp as cavalry sabers cut through the valleys below. The creeks that usually sang their way down the rocky slopes had fallen silent, imprisoned beneath layers of ice that gleamed like broken glass in the pale sunlight. In the small mining town of Copper Ridge, nestled between two forbidding peaks, the first heavy snows had trapped most folks indoors. Those brave enough to venture out hurried between buildings with their faces wrapped in wool scarves, their breath-forming clouds that froze and fell like tiny crystals to the ground. It was on such a morning, when the temperature had dropped so low that even the church bell cracked when rung, that Martha Caldwell found herself standing at the edge of town with nothing but the clothes on her back and a small cloth bundle clutched to her chest. Martha was barely 22, though the past months had aged her beyond those years. Her auburn hair, once the envy of every young woman in Copper Ridge, hung limp and tangled beneath a thin bonnet. Her dress, a faded blue calico that had seen better days, offered little protection against the bitter cold. But it wasn't the weather that had driven the color from her cheeks and the light from her green eyes. It was the weight of shame that the townsfolk had heaped upon her shoulders. "Get out, and don't you dare show your face here again!" Mrs. Henderson, the minister's wife, had shrieked from her doorway just an hour before. Other voices had joined the chorus. Faces Martha had once considered friendly, now twisted with disgust and righteous anger. They called her names that cut deeper than any winter wind, accused her of sins she hadn't committed, all because of a lie spread by Thomas Brennan, the mayor's son who couldn't accept that she'd refused his advances. The accusations had spread through Copper Ridge like wildfire in August. By the time Martha could defend herself, the damage was done. Her reputation lay in tatters, her job at the general store lost, and even the boarding house where she'd lived had turned her out. The truth didn't matter anymore. In a town where gossip was currency and reputation was everything, she had become worthless. Now, as she stood at the boundary between civilization and wilderness, Martha pulled her thin shawl tighter around her shoulders. Behind her lay everything she had ever known, the streets where she'd played as a child, the schoolhouse where she'd learned to read, the cemetery where her parents lay buried. Before her stretched the unknown, miles of forest thick with snow, mountains that scraped the gray sky, and a silence so complete it seemed to swallow sound itself. She took her first step into that white emptiness, her worn boots crunching through the fresh powder. The cold bit through the thin leather immediately, but she pressed on. Where else could she go? She had no family left, no friends who would risk their own standing to help her, and no money for passage on the next stagecoach, even if she'd known where to go. The trees closed around her like the bars of a prison, their branches heavy with snow that occasionally dropped in soft thuds that made her jump. She followed what might have been a deer trail, though it was hard to tell beneath the white blanket that covered everything. Her fingers, despite being wrapped in thin gloves, began to lose feeling. Her toes went numb, then painful, then numb again. Hours passed, or perhaps minutes. Time lost meaning in the monotonous white landscape. Martha's breath came in ragged gasps that crystallized in the air before her. Her legs, already weak from days of eating little, began to shake with each step. The small bundle she carried, containing only a change of undergarments, her mother's Bible, and a piece of bread she'd managed to save, grew heavier with each passing moment. The sun, hidden behind thick clouds, gave no indication of the time. Martha knew only that the light was fading, that shadows were growing longer between the trees. Panic began to claw at her chest. She had no shelter, no way to make fire, no idea where she was going. The romantic notion of disappearing into the wilderness, of finding some abandoned cabin where she could live in peace, crumbled against the harsh reality of her situation. Her foot caught on a hidden root, sending her tumbling into the snow. The impact knocked the wind from her lungs, and for a moment she lay there, feeling the cold seep through her dress. When she tried to stand, her legs buckled, She crawled forward a few feet before collapsing again. That's when she heard it. The sound of water. Not the free-flowing babble of a summer stream, but the muffled gurgle of water moving beneath ice, using the last of her strength. Martha pulled herself toward the sound until she reached the bank of a frozen creek. The ice was thick but clear in places, and she could see the dark water moving beneath, oblivious to the frozen world above. She dragged herself to a large pine whose branches offered some shelter from the falling snow, her back against its rough bark. She pulled her knees to her chest and finally allowed the tears to come. They froze on her cheeks almost immediately, but she couldn't stop them. Great. Shuddering sobs racked her body as everything crashed down upon her. The injustice, the betrayal, the cold, the hunger, the terrible certainty that she would die here, alone and unmourned. Her cries echoed off the frozen creek, absorbed by the snow-laden trees, lost in the vast indifference of the wilderness. She wept for her parents, taken by fever 3 winters past. She wept for the life she'd lost, for the future she'd never have. She wept until she had no tears left, until her sobs became whimpers. Then silence. It was in that silence that she heard the footsteps. They were heavy, deliberate, crunching through the snow with a rhythm that spoke of someone comfortable in this frozen world. Martha's heart hammered against her ribs. A wolf, a bear, or worse, had someone from town followed her? The footsteps stopped. Through her blurred vision, she saw a figure emerge from between the trees. It was a man, but unlike any she'd known in Copper Ridge. He stood well over 6 feet, his broad shoulders made broader by a coat of dark bear fur. A rifle rested easily in his gloved hands, and a large knife hung from his belt. His face was obscured by a thick beard, dark as the pines around them. And his eyes, she couldn't see their color in the fading light, but she felt their intensity as they fixed upon her. He stood there for a long moment, as still as the trees themselves, seeming to assess the situation. Martha wanted to run, to scream, to do something, but her body wouldn't respond. She could only sit there, pressed against the pine tree, waiting for whatever fate this mountain man might bring. Then, slowly, as if approaching a wounded animal, he took a step closer. The mountain man moved with surprising grace for someone of his size, each step deliberate and sure despite the deepening snow. As he drew closer, Martha could make out more details in the dying light. His face was weathered by wind and sun, with deep lines around eyes that might have been gray or blue. Those eyes held no malice, but rather a wariness mixed with something else, perhaps concern, though she couldn't be certain. He stopped a few feet away, close enough that she could smell the wood smoke and pine resin that clung to his fur coat. For a long moment, neither spoke. Martha's teeth chattered uncontrollably, and she wrapped her arms tighter around herself, though it did little good. The man's gaze swept over her, taking in the thin dress, the inadequate shawl, the tear-frozen cheeks. His brow furrowed beneath the fur cap he wore. Then, without warning, he shrugged off his heavy coat. Martha flinched as he stepped forward, but he moved slowly, holding the coat out like a peace offering. The cold must have been biting at him too now, wearing only a thick wool shirt and leather vest, but he showed no sign of it. "You'll die if you stay here," he said. His voice was deep, rough from disuse, with an accent she couldn't quite place, maybe Scottish, mellowed by years in the American wilderness. Martha tried to respond, but her jaw was locked from the cold, her lips too numb to form words. The man didn't wait for an answer. He draped the coat around her shoulders, and the weight of it, along with the warmth still trapped in its folds, nearly made her sob again. Then, before she could protest even if she'd been able, he wrapped his arms around her, pulling her against his chest. She sobbed by the frozen creek. The mountain man wrapped her in his arms. The intimacy of it should have terrified her. Here was a strange man, holding her in the middle of nowhere, and she was completely at his mercy. But terror required energy she no longer possessed. Instead, she felt only the blessed warmth seeping through her frozen limbs, the steady heartbeat against her ear, the sensation of being sheltered for the first time in days. "We need to move," he said after a moment, his breath visible in the cold air. "Can you walk?" Martha tried to nod, but when he helped her to her feet, her legs buckled immediately. Without hesitation, he scooped her up as if she weighed no more than a child, one arm beneath her knees, the other supporting her back. He carried her away from the frozen creek and into the darkening forest. My things," Martha managed to whisper, thinking of the small bundle she'd dropped. "I'll come back for them," he said, not breaking stride. The journey blurred in Martha's memory. She drifted in and out of consciousness, aware only of movement, of being carried through a world of white and shadow. Tree branches appeared and disappeared above her. The man's breathing remained steady despite her weight and the difficult terrain. Once, she thought she heard him speaking, not to her, but to himself, or perhaps to the forest, in low tones that might have been prayer or curse. When she next opened her eyes fully, they were no longer in the forest. Warmth hit her face, real warmth. Not just the absence of killing cold. Firelight danced on rough wooden walls. She was lying on something soft, a bed of furs near a stone hearth where flames crackled and sparked. The man was there, adding wood to the fire. He'd removed his fur cap, revealing dark hair shot through with premature gray. Martha guessed he might be 35, perhaps 40. It was hard to tell with mountain men, who aged differently than town folks. "Where?" she began, her voice barely a whisper. "My cabin," he said without turning. "You're safe." Safe. The word seemed foreign after everything that had happened. Martha tried to sit up, and immediately the world spun. The man was beside her in an instant, pressing a cup to her lips. "Drink? It's just warm water with a little whiskey. It'll help." The liquid burned, but it was a good burn, spreading warmth through her chest. As her eyes adjusted, she took in her surroundings. The cabin was small but sturdy, built of thick logs chinked with mud. Furs hung on the walls. Bear, deer, wolf. Tools were arranged neatly on pegs, traps, knives, a spare rifle. Everything spoke of a life lived in careful solitude. "Why?" she asked when she could speak again. "Why help me?" The man returned to tending the fire. "Couldn't leave you to freeze," he said simply. "Wouldn't be right." "But you don't know me. I could be—" She trailed off, unsure what danger she could possibly pose to this giant of a man. "Could be running from something," he finished. "Most folks who end up in these mountains doesn't mean they deserve to die for it." Martha felt tears threatening again. After days of condemnation, this simple acceptance was almost too much to bear. She pulled the furs tighter around herself, realizing for the first time that her wet dress had been replaced with a rough wool shirt that hung to her knees. Her cheeks burned with embarrassment. "I didn't look," the man said, apparently reading her thoughts. "Just got you out of those wet things. You were turning blue." "Thank you," she whispered. Then, feeling she owed him something more. "My name is Martha Caldwell." He nodded but didn't offer his own name. Instead, he moved to a rough table and began ladling something from a pot that hung near the fire. The smell hit her, meat and wild onions, and her stomach cramped with hunger. "When's the last time you ate?" he asked, bringing her a bowl. 2 days ago, maybe 3. He muttered something under his breath that might have been a curse. "Eat slow," he warned, handing her the bowl and a carved wooden spoon. "Too fast and you'll sick it back up." The stew was gamey. Venison, she thought, but to Martha it might have been a feast fit for Queen Victoria herself. She forced herself to take small bites, to chew thoroughly, though every instinct screamed at her to devour it all at once. The man sat across from her, in a chair made of pine logs and rawhide, watching her eat with those unreadable eyes. The silence stretched between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. After the cruel words and harsh judgments of the town, silence felt like a blessing. "You can stay tonight," he said finally. "Storm's getting worse. In the morning, if you're strong enough, I'll take you wherever you need to go." "I have nowhere," Martha admitted, the words bitter on her tongue. The town, They won't have me back. He studied her for a long moment. What happened? Martha set down the empty bowl, surprised to find she'd finished it all. How could she explain? How could she tell this stranger about Thomas Brennan's wandering hands, his whispered threats when she'd refused him, the lies he'd spread when she'd threatened to tell his father? How could she describe the way the whole town had turned on her, choosing to believe the mayor's son over the orphaned shop girl? I was accused of something I didn't do, she said finally. My word against someone more important. You can guess how that ended. The man's expression darkened, and for a moment Martha glimpsed something dangerous beneath his quiet exterior, but he only nodded, as if her story was familiar. Towns can be cruel, he said. Sometimes the wilderness is more honest. They sat in silence again, the fire popping and settling in the hearth. Outside, the wind had picked up, rattling the cabin's solid walls. Martha found herself fighting to keep her eyes open, exhaustion pulling at her like an undertow. Sleep, the man said. You're safe here. I don't even know your name, she murmured, already half gone. Elijah, he said after a pause. Elijah Stone. But Martha was already asleep, curled in the furs by the fire, while the storm raged outside and the mountain man kept his quiet watch. Martha woke to the sound of an axe biting into wood. For a moment, she couldn't place where she was. The rough wooden walls, the animal furs, the lingering smell of wood smoke all seemed part of some strange dream. Then memory flooded back. The flight from town, the frozen creek, the mountain man who'd saved her life. Pale morning light filtered through oiled paper that served as windows. The storm had passed, leaving the world outside muffled in fresh snow. Martha sat up slowly, her body protesting every movement. She was still wearing Elijah's wool shirt, her own dress hanging near the fire, dry but torn in places from her flight through the forest. The door opened, bringing a blast of cold air and Elijah himself, arms full of split wood. Snow dusted his shoulders and beard. He glanced at her, gave a brief nod, then went about stacking the wood near the hearth. There's coffee, he said, gesturing to a pot near the fire. And some biscuits in that tin there. Martha found her voice. I should go. I've imposed enough. Go where? He turned to face her, his expression matter-of-fact. Storm dropped 2 feet of snow last night. Drifts are higher than your head in places. You wouldn't make it a mile. The finality in his voice brooked no argument. Martha pulled the furs tighter around herself, unsure whether to feel relieved or trapped. Then I'll work for my keep, she said. I can cook, clean, mend. Can you skin a deer? Martha blinked. No. Can you set a trap? Read weather signs? Tell the difference between black bear and grizzly tracks? No, but then eat your breakfast. We'll worry about the rest later. Over the following days, a routine emerged. Elijah would leave at dawn to check his trap lines, returning at midday with rabbit, beaver, or occasionally something larger. Martha would have coffee ready, and something hot, though her attempts at cooking with his limited supplies often resulted in barely edible messes that he ate without complaint. You need to keep the heat steady, he explained one afternoon, showing her how to bank the coals in the outdoor smoking shed. Too hot and the meat cooks instead of cures, too cool and it spoils. His hands, massive and scarred from years of wilderness living, moved with surprising delicacy as he demonstrated. Martha watched, trying to memorize every detail. She'd grown up in town, where meat came from the butcher already cut and ready. This was different, primitive, but somehow more honest. My mother used to smoke hams, she offered, back in Ohio, before we came west. It was the first personal detail she'd shared since that first night. Elijah glanced at her but didn't press for more. As the days passed, Martha learned the rhythm of mountain life. Wake before dawn. Tend the fire, always tend the fire, for without it, death waited just outside the door. Melt snow for water. Check the stored food. Watch for signs of spoilage or rodents. Every task had a purpose. Every moment of daylight was precious. Elijah taught her to read the woods around the cabin. See how the snow's disturbed there? Deer passed through last night, and those marks on the pine, bear, marking territory. Been using that same tree for years. Aren't you afraid? Martha asked, eyeing the claw marks that started well above her head. Fear's useful if it keeps you careful. Useless if it keeps you frozen. He paused, then added, Bears denned up for winter anyway. It's the wolves you watch for when the hunger gets bad. That night, as if summoned by his words, howls echoed through the valley. Martha froze in the act of mending one of Elijah's shirts. He'd finally accepted her offer to repair his clothes, which were held together more by habit than thread. They're not close, Elijah said, not looking up from the rifle he was cleaning. Sound carries in the mountains. Those are probably 5 miles off, maybe more. Probably? A slight smile creased his weathered face. Nothing certain out here except uncertainty. Despite his reassurance, Martha found herself moving closer to the fire. In town, wolves were creatures of fairy tales, dangers that lurked in stories told to frighten children. Here, they were real as the cold that crept through every crack in the cabin walls. "Why do you live out here?" she asked suddenly. "Alone. I mean—" Elijah's hand stilled on the rifle. For a long moment, she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, towns have their own wolves. Some wear sheep's clothing. It was the most he'd said about himself, and Martha recognized the deflection. Still, she understood. Hadn't she fled her own wolves? Even if they walked on 2 legs and spoke scripture on Sundays? The next morning brought new lessons. Elijah showed her how to stretch and clean pelts, how to tell good fur from bad, how to prepare hides for trade. "This is how I make my living," he explained, running his hand over a beautifully prepared beaver pelt. "Come spring, I'll take these down to Fort Benton, trade for supplies to last another year." "You go to town?" Martha couldn't hide her surprise. "Once a year, maybe twice if the trapping's especially good. Don't stay longer than necessary." She wanted to ask why, but held back. He'd tell her when he was ready, or not at all. She was beginning to understand that words were currency in the mountains, not to be spent carelessly. That afternoon, while Elijah was out checking his lines, disaster nearly struck. Martha was melting snow for water when she heard scratching at the door. Thinking it was Elijah returned early, she lifted the latch. A wolf stood in the doorway, lean, gray, with yellow eyes that held a hunger beyond description. For an endless moment, Martha and the beast stared at each other. Then it lunged. Martha screamed, stumbling backward. The wolf's teeth snapped inches from her throat as she fell. It followed her down, its weight crushing, its breath hot and rank. She threw her arms up, felt teeth tear through the wool shirt, pain blooming along her forearm. A rifle shot split the air. The wolf jerked, then collapsed, its blood spreading crimson across the cabin floor. Elijah stood in the doorway, rifle smoking, his face pale beneath the weathered tan. "Let me see," he said, dropping to his knees beside her. His hands were gentle as he examined her arm. The bites weren't deep, the thick wool had protected her, but they bled freely. "Fool woman," he muttered, but there was no heat in it. His hands shook slightly as he cleaned the wounds with whiskey. "Never open that door without checking first, never." "I thought it was you," Martha whispered, tears streaming down her face, more from shock than pain. "I know." His voice softened. "I know, but thinking'll get you killed out here. You need to know." He wrapped her arm carefully, then helped her to the bed. She was shaking now, reaction setting in. Elijah dragged the wolf's carcass outside, then returned to clean the blood from the floor. All the while, he kept glancing at her, as if reassuring himself she was still there, still breathing. That night, he didn't go to his usual corner but sat near her bed, rifle across his knees. "You don't have to guard me," Martha said. "It was my own foolishness." "Maybe," he agreed. "But I brought you here. That makes you my responsibility. I'm no one's responsibility but my own." He looked at her then, really looked at her, and Martha saw something shift in his gray eyes. Maybe that's been true for too long, for both of us. The words hung in the air between them, weighted with possibility. Outside, the wind howled through the pines, but inside the cabin, warmed by fire and something harder to name, Martha felt safer than she had in months. Her arm throbbed where the wolf had bitten, a reminder of how quickly death could come in this unforgiving place. But Elijah was there, steady as the mountains themselves, and somehow that was enough. She closed her eyes, not to sleep but to hold on to this moment, this strange peace found in the most unlikely place, with the most unlikely companion. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new lessons in survival. But tonight, she was warm, she was healing, and she was not alone. The fire crackled softly, and Elijah began to hum, a low, tuneless sound that might have been a lullaby from some half-forgotten childhood. Martha let it wash over her, a bulwark against the wild darkness beyond the walls. The wolf attack changed something between them, where before there had been polite distance. Now Martha caught Elijah watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. He began teaching her with more urgency how to load and fire his spare rifle, how to recognize the signs of predators circling the cabin, how to bar the door properly against more than just wind. It was during one of these lessons, as he stood behind her adjusting her grip on the rifle stock, that he spoke of his past. "I had a wife once," he said quietly, his breath warm against her ear. "Sarah, sweet little thing from Indiana. Brought her out here 8 years ago, full of dreams about making a life in the territories." Martha held perfectly still, afraid that any movement might stop this rare unveiling. "She lasted 2 winters. The third took her. Fever. Couldn't get her to a doctor in time." His hands tightened briefly on the rifle. "After that, well, there didn't seem much point in going back to civilization." "I'm sorry," Martha whispered. "Don't be. It was a long time ago." He stepped back, the moment of intimacy broken. "But that's why I know. This life isn't for everyone. Come spring, I'll take you to Fort Benton. You can make a fresh start there." Martha lowered the rifle, turning to face him. "And if I don't want to go?" Something flickered in his eyes. "Then you're a fool. This is no life for a woman alone." "I'm not alone," she said, then flushed at her boldness. Elijah turned away, busying himself with unnecessary tasks. Martha recognized the retreat and didn't push. She was beginning to understand that Elijah's stone carried wounds that had nothing to do with bear claws or wolf teeth. As February crept toward March, the weather grew worse instead of better. Blizzards rolled through the valley in waves, each one sealing them more thoroughly into their small world. The woodpile that had seemed enormous now looked merely adequate. Food stores ran lower. "We'll need fresh meat soon," Elijah announced one morning, studying the gray sky. "Storm's going to break tomorrow, maybe the day after. I'll need to range farther, maybe be gone overnight." "I'll come with you," Martha said immediately. "No, I can help. I've learned—" "Not enough." His tone was final. "Not near enough." Martha bristled. "So I'm to sit here like some helpless child while I do what I've done for 8 years?" He finished. "Yes." They glared at each other across the small space. It was their first real argument, and the cabin suddenly felt too small to contain it. "Fine," Martha said coldly. "I'll just practice being useless." Elijah's jaw tightened, but he said nothing more. The rest of the day passed in uncomfortable silence. That night, as they sat on opposite sides of the fire, Martha finally spoke. "I'm sorry. I know you're trying to keep me safe. Safety's an illusion out here," Elijah replied, not looking up from the trap he was mending. "Best we can do is be prepared." "Then prepare me," she challenged. "Really prepare me, not just the easy lessons." He did look up then, studying her in the firelight. "You think you want that? To know what I know? To see what I've seen?" "I think I need it," Martha said steadily, "whether I want it or not." Elijah set aside the trap, moving to a chest in the corner. He withdrew something wrapped in oilcloth. Returning to the fire, he unwrapped it carefully, revealing a piece of paper, a wanted poster, yellowed with age. Martha's breath caught. The sketch was rough, but recognizable as a younger Elijah. Below it, in bold letters, "Wanted for murder, Elijah Stone. Reward $500. This is why I live out here," he said quietly, "not by choice." Martha stared at the poster, her mind racing. Murder. The word seemed impossible to reconcile with the man who'd saved her life, who'd tended her wounds with such gentleness. "Did you do it?" she asked, surprised by how steady her voice sounded. "No." The word was flat, final. But that didn't matter. Man I was accused of killing was the brother of a territorial judge. My word against his family's influence? He rewrapped the poster carefully. "So I ran. Been running ever since." The parallels to her own situation weren't lost on Martha. False accusations, influential enemies, a justice system that served power rather than truth. She reached across the space between them, laying her hand over his. "I believe you," she said simply. His hand turned beneath hers, fingers interlacing. "That's more than anyone's done in 8 years." They sat that way for a long moment, hands clasped across the divide of their separate griefs. Then Elijah squeezed gently and let go. "There's more," he said. "The judge, he's never stopped looking. Sends men out sometimes, bounty hunters, hired guns. Had one find me 3 years back." "What happened?" "What had to happen?" His voice was grim. "Self-defense. But try explaining that to a marshal when you're already wanted. Just added to my sins in their eyes." Martha absorbed this information, understanding dawning. "That's why you only go to Fort Benton once a year, why you were so wary when you found me." He nodded. "Every stranger could be the one who finally collects that bounty. It's no way to live, always looking over your shoulder. Yet you risked it to help me. Couldn't leave you to die," he said again, echo of that first night. "Whatever else I've become, I'm not that far gone." The wind picked up outside, rattling the windows. Martha shivered. Though the cabin was warm enough, the fragile peace they'd built suddenly seemed terribly vulnerable. "What if they come here?" she asked. "What if helping me leads them to you?" "Then I deal with it," Elijah said with a fatalism born of years as prey. "Been lucky so far. Maybe luck holds. Maybe it doesn't." "That's not—" Martha began hotly, then stopped. What could she offer? She'd brought nothing but her own troubles, added her own dangers to his. "Hey," Elijah said softly. "Don't, whatever comes, it's not on you. Man makes his own choices." But Martha heard what he didn't say, that choosing to help her might have been his last free choice, that kindness in this harsh world carried its own price. That night, she lay awake listening to his breathing from across the room. He'd insisted on giving her the bed after her injury, making himself a pallet near the door. Guardian and protector, even in sleep. She thought about the wanted poster, about the man he'd been forced to kill in self-defense. She thought about how the world shaped people, bent them or broke them or forced them into impossible corners. And she thought about tomorrow, when he would leave to hunt, and she would be alone with nothing but the fire and her fears for company. When she finally slept, she dreamed of wolves, not the one that had attacked her, but human wolves, circling the cabin with torches and rope. In the dream, she stood in the doorway with Elijah's rifle, ready to defend what had become, against all odds and reason. Home. She woke to find Elijah preparing to leave, his movements quiet in the pre-dawn darkness. When he saw her watching, he paused. "I'll be back," he promised. 2 days at most. Be careful," she whispered. He crossed to her then, surprising them both. His hand touched her cheek, rough calluses gentle against her skin. "You too, Martha Caldwell. You too." Then he was gone, swallowed by the forest and the falling snow, leaving Martha alone with the echoes of their shared secrets and the weight of understanding. They were two fugitives, hiding from different wolves, but finding, perhaps, that together they stood a better chance than either did alone. The first day alone passed slowly. Martha kept herself busy, tending the fire, melting snow for water, organizing and reorganizing the meager supplies. But as darkness fell, Every sound outside made her jump. The rifle Elijah had left her lay across her lap as she sat by the fire, her fingers cramping from gripping it too tightly. By the second evening, worry gnawed at her like hunger. Elijah had promised 2 days at most, but the sun was setting on the second day with no sign of him. The storm he'd predicted had arrived with a vengeance, turning the world outside into a white fury that erased all landmarks, all paths. Martha paced the small cabin, checking the windows, adding wood to the fire. She'd eaten little, her stomach too knotted with concern. What if he'd been injured? What if the cold had taken him? What if those bounty hunters had finally found him? Near midnight, she heard it, a sound different from the wind's howling. Footsteps, labored and uneven. Approaching the cabin, Martha's heart hammered as she positioned herself behind the table, rifle raised. "Martha!" The voice was barely audible through the door. "It's me!" She flew to the door, fumbling with the bar. Elijah fell inside, bringing a swirl of snow and cold. He was bent nearly double, one arm pressed against his side, his face gray with exhaustion and something else, pain. "What happened?" Martha helped him to the bed, her hands already searching for injury. "Got the elk," he managed through clenched teeth. "But the storm. Had to leave most of it. Tried to get back." He sucked in a sharp breath as she peeled back his coat. Blood. His shirt was soaked with it, a dark stain spreading from his left side. Martha's medical knowledge was limited to basic remedies her mother had taught her, but she'd seen enough farm accidents to know this was serious. "Fell," Elijah explained as she cut away the shirt with shaking hands. "Ledge gave way. Caught myself on a broken branch going down." The wound was a deep gash along his ribs, still seeping blood. Martha pressed a clean cloth against it, trying to remember everything she'd ever heard about treating injuries. "Need to clean it," she said, forcing her voice to steady. "This is going to hurt." "Already hurts," he said with a weak attempt at humor. Martha heated water, added a generous amount of whiskey to it. When she poured it over the wound, Elijah's whole body went rigid, a strangled sound escaping his throat. But he didn't pull away, didn't tell her to stop. She worked by firelight, cleaning the wound as best she could, then packing it with strips torn from her petticoat, the cleanest fabric available. Her hands were steady now, focused on the task. There would be time for fear later. "Need to stitch it," she said, though the thought terrified her. "Do you have thread in the chest? Needle too. Done it before on smaller cuts." Martha found the items, sterilized the needle in the fire. "I've only ever sewn fabric," she warned. "Same principle," Elijah said, though his attempt at reassurance was undermined by the pain in his eyes. "Just do it quick." She did. Each push of the needle made him flinch, made her stomach turn, but she forced herself to continue. The stitches were uneven, nothing like the neat embroidery she'd learned as a girl, but they held the wound closed. When it was done, she wrapped his ribs with more strips of petticoat, then helped him lie back. He was sweating despite the cold, his breathing shallow. "Thank you," he whispered. Martha pulled the furs up to his chin, then retrieved the rifle. "Rest. I'll keep watch." "Martha, rest," she said firmly, taking the chair he usually occupied. The night was endless. Elijah drifted in and out of fevered sleep, sometimes muttering words she couldn't catch. Martha kept the fire burning, changed the bandages when they soaked through, forced water between his lips when he'd take it. By dawn, the fever had taken hold in earnest. Elijah burned beneath the furs, his skin hot and dry. Martha had seen fever take her parents, knew how quickly it could turn deadly, especially here with no doctor, no medicines save what nature provided. She remembered her mother treating fevers with willow bark tea, but there were no willows here, and she dared not leave Elijah to search. Instead, she did what she could, cooling his face with snow-dampened cloths, keeping him hydrated, talking to him when delirium took hold. "Sarah," he called once, reaching for someone who wasn't there. "Sarah, I'm sorry. Should have taken you back. Should have—" "Shh," Martha soothed. catching his searching hand. "It's all right. You're all right." His fingers tightened on hers with surprising strength. "Don't leave," he pleaded, and she wasn't sure if he was speaking to her or to the ghost of his wife. "I won't," she promised. "I'm right here." The second night was worse. Elijah's breathing grew labored, the wound hot and angry-looking despite her care. Martha found herself praying, really praying, for the first time since her parents' death, not to the stern God of Copperidge's church, but to something older, wilder, that might have mercy on one good man in the wilderness. Near dawn, the fever broke. Elijah's breathing eased. His skin cooled. When he opened his eyes, they were clear, focused on her face. "You're still here," he said, wonder in his voice. "Where else would I be?" Martha asked, exhaustion making her honest. He studied her, the dark circles under her eyes, the tear tracks on her cheeks, the determined set of her jaw. "You saved my life, returning the favor," she said, but her voice broke on the words. The relief of seeing him lucid was overwhelming. "Don't ever scare me like that again." "I'll try," he said solemnly, then winced. "How bad?" "Bad enough. You'll need to rest for days, maybe weeks. The wound's deep, and if fever comes back—" "It won't," he said with quiet certainty. "Not with you here." Something shifted between them in that moment. Acknowledgement of a bond forged in crisis. Martha realized she was still holding his hand, started to pull away, but he held on. "That first night," he said slowly, "when I found you by the creek, you asked why I helped. I said I couldn't leave you to die." Martha nodded, remembering. That was true, but not the whole truth. His thumb traced circles on her palm. "Truth is, when I saw you there, crying in the snow, I saw myself 8 years ago. Lost everything. Wanted to die, probably would have if an old trapper hadn't taken pity on me. Taught me to survive out here." "What happened to him?" "Died 3 winters back, natural causes. Heart gave out. I buried him up on the ridge where he liked to watch the sunrise." Elijah's eyes grew distant. "He used to say the mountains don't care about your past, only whether you're strong enough for today. Took me a long time to understand that. And now I think maybe he was only half right. The mountains don't care about your past. True enough. But the people in them might, the right people. Anyway," Martha felt her cheeks warm. "Elijah, I know," he said quickly. "I know we're both running, both broken in our ways. But Martha, these past weeks, I'd forgotten what it was like to not be alone, to have someone to come home to worry when I'm gone, to stitch you up when you do something foolish," she suggested, trying to lighten the moment. A smile. The first real smile she'd seen from him. It transformed his face, showing the man he might have been in another life. That too. They stayed that way as the morning light grew stronger. Hands linked, barriers lowered if not quite fallen. Outside, the storm was finally breaking, sunlight piercing the clouds in brilliant shafts. The world looked new-made, all sharp edges softened by snow, all scars hidden beneath pristine white. "Spring will come," Elijah said softly. "Roads will clear. You could still go to Fort Benton, start fresh." "I could," Martha agreed. "But then who would keep you from bleeding to death on some mountain ledge? Is that the only reason you'd stay?" She looked at him, this man who'd saved her, who'd trusted her with his darkest secret, who looked at her now with hope and fear mingled in his gray eyes. "No," she said simply. "Not the only reason." His fingers tightened on hers, and something that had been frozen began to thaw. Not just in the world outside, but in 2 hearts that had thought themselves too damaged for such feelings. It wasn't a declaration of love. Not yet. But it was a beginning, as fragile and persistent as the first green shoots that would soon push through the snow. Martha would tend his wound in the days that followed. They would share more stories, more silences, more moments of connection, and slowly, carefully, they would build something neither had dared hope for, a future that belonged to them both. Recovery was slow. For 2 weeks, Elijah could barely move without pain lancing through his side. Martha took on the tasks of survival, checking the snares he'd set near the cabin, maintaining the fire, melting snow for water. She'd grown stronger during her months in the mountains, no longer the fragile town girl who'd collapsed by the frozen creek. "You're different," Elijah observed one afternoon, watching her efficiently skin a rabbit she'd found in one of the traps. "Necessity is a harsh teacher," Martha replied, her hand steady on the knife. Strange to think how such work would have horrified her in Copper Ridge. Now it was simply what needed doing. "Best kind sometimes," he said. "Strips away what doesn't matter." As March wore on, signs of spring began to appear. The snow settled and compacted. Icicles formed and dripped during the warmest part of the day, and occasionally, the call of birds returning north echoed through the valley. With the changing season came a different kind of tension, the knowledge that soon, travel would be possible again. They didn't speak of it directly, but it hung between them like morning mist. Martha found herself treasuring small moments. The way Elijah's eyes crinkled when she made him laugh with stories of her childhood mishaps. How his hands had gentled when he taught her to repair a torn net. The comfortable silence they could share while working side by side. One evening, as she helped him rewrap his bandages, her fingers brushed the other scars marking his body. Claw marks, old bullet wounds, the map of a hard life written in damaged flesh. "Each one has a story," he said quietly. "You don't have to tell them," Martha said, but he caught her hand, held it against a puckered scar on his shoulder. "This one, Grizzly, first year out here, thought I knew everything about surviving. Bear taught me different." His hand guided hers to another mark. "Bullet from a claim jumper over in the bitter roots. And this," he indicated a thin line across his collarbone. "Bar fight in Fort Benton, last time I drank whiskey in public." "So many close calls," Martha murmured. "Everyone a lesson. Everyone alone." He looked up at her. "Until now." The moment stretched between them, taut as a bowstring. Martha became acutely aware of her hand still resting on his bare shoulder, of how close they were, of the way his eyes had darkened. Then, as if by mutual agreement, they pulled back. Not yet. The space seemed to say, not quite yet, but that night, when nightmares of the town's cruel faces woke her, she found Elijah sitting by her bed, his hand covering hers on the blanket. "Just a dream," he soothed. They felt so real, the accusations, the hatred. She shuddered. "I know. Still dream about the trial sometimes." The judge's voice saying guilty when he knew, they all knew, it wasn't true. "How do you bear it? One day at a time, one season at a time." He squeezed her hand gently. "Gets easier when you're not bearing it alone." The next morning brought unwelcome reality in the form of horse tracks near the cabin. Fresh ones, no more than a few hours old. Elijah studied them grimly, his body tense despite the healing wound. "Shod horses," he said. "At least 3, maybe 4. "Trappers," Martha suggested hopefully. "Wrong direction. Trappers work the valleys north of here. These came from the south. From the direction of town." The word hung unspoken between them. "Bounty hunters. Or perhaps men from Copper Ridge, following up on rumors of a woman who'd fled into the mountains." Either way, it meant danger. "We need to be ready," Elijah said, already moving to check his rifle, ensure their powder was dry. "Maybe they'll pass by," Martha said. "Maybe they're not looking for us at all." But even as she spoke, she knew the hope was thin. The cabin, while hidden, wasn't invisible. Any experienced tracker would find it eventually. They spent the day in tense preparation. Elijah, moving carefully to protect his injury, showed Martha where he kept extra ammunition, explained the layout of escape routes through the surrounding forest. They packed emergency supplies, dried meat, matches, blankets, in case they needed to flee. "If something happens," he said, catching her shoulders to ensure she was listening. "You run. Take the north trail. Follow it to the split rock, then east to the river. There's a cache there, supplies, some money, enough to get you to Canada if need be." "I'm not leaving you," Martha said fiercely. Martha, no. We stand together or not at all. I won't run again. Not alone. He studied her face, saw the determination there. Stubborn woman, he muttered, but there was affection in it. Learn from the best, she shot back, winning a small smile despite the circumstances. Night fell with no sign of the riders, but neither of them slept. They sat by the banked fire, weapons close at hand, listening to every sound the darkness brought. Near midnight, Elijah reached over and took her hand. Whatever comes, he began. Don't, Martha interrupted. Don't talk like we're saying goodbye. Not goodbye, just want you to know, these months, having you here, it's been like coming alive again. Didn't realize how much of me had gone numb until you thawed it out. Martha's throat tightened. Elijah. Let me finish. Should have said it sooner. But I was afraid of wanting something I couldn't have, couldn't keep. But if those riders come tomorrow, if this all ends, I need you to know, you matter to me, Martha Caldwell. More than my life, more than my freedom. You matter. In the flickering firelight, Martha saw the truth in his eyes. Love offered without expectation, without demand, the kind of love she'd stopped believing existed. You matter to me too, she whispered. I think you have since that night by the creek, when you wrapped me in your coat. I felt safe, for the first time in so long. I felt safe. And then later, when I learned your story, I realized we're the same. Two people the world broke, trying to build something from the pieces. Maybe that's enough, Elijah said softly. Maybe two broken halves can make something whole. Martha leaned into him carefully, mindful of his wound. His arm came around her, solid and warm. They sat that way as the fire burned low, facing whatever dawn would bring together. The sun rose on an empty forest. The riders, whoever they were, had passed by. But the scare had crystallized something for both of them. They were no longer two individuals sharing a cabin for convenience and survival. They were partners, bound by choice and circumstance and something deeper than either. When Elijah was healed enough to work again, they ventured out together. He showed her his secret places, the hidden valleys where elk gathered, the caves that could serve as shelters, the streams that ran clear even in drought. Martha absorbed it all, understanding that he was sharing more than survival knowledge. He was sharing his world, making her part of it permanently. Spring's coming fast now, he said one afternoon as they watched eagles circle overhead. Another month, maybe less, and the passes will be clear. I know, Martha said simply. Still time to change your mind. About staying. She turned to face him fully. My mind was made up the night you nearly died. Maybe before that. This is my home now. You're my home. The kiss was inevitable then, gentle, careful of healing wounds both physical and emotional. When they parted, Elijah rested his forehead against hers. Won't be easy, he warned. This life, always looking over our shoulders, never fully safe. But not alone, Martha countered. Never alone again. No, he agreed, pulling her close. Never alone again. They walked back to the cabin hand in hand, two souls who'd found each other in the wilderness, who'd chosen love over fear, connection over isolation. Behind them, their footprints in the melting snow told a simple story, two paths converging, continuing as one toward whatever future they would forge together. The peace couldn't last. 2 weeks after the snow finally melted from the lower valleys, they came. Martha was washing clothes in the stream near the cabin when she heard the dogs, not wolves. She'd learned to distinguish their wild song from the disciplined baying of hunting hounds. These were trackers, and they were close. She abandoned the washing, running for the cabin with her heart hammering against her ribs. Elijah met her at the door, his face grim. He'd heard them too. How many? She gasped. 6 men, maybe 7, with dogs. He was already loading his rifle, checking the ammunition. They'll be here within the hour. We should run. No! His voice was firm. Running's over. They've got our scent now. Dogs will track us wherever we go. He pressed the spare rifle into her hands. "Remember what I taught you?" Martha's hands shook as she checked the weapon. All those lessons, all that practice. And now it came to this. Maybe we can talk to them. Explain. Men who bring dogs aren't looking to talk. Elijah moved to the window, peering through a crack in the shutters. "Get behind the water barrel. If things go bad, we stand together." Martha interrupted. "You said it yourself. Running's over." He looked at her then, his gray eyes holding a mixture of pride, love, and sorrow. "Should have taken you to Fort Benton when I had the chance. I would have come back," she said simply. "This is where I belong." The dogs arrived first. A pack of blue-tick hounds that circled the cabin, baying their discovery to the sky. Then came the men on horseback, spreading out to surround the small building. Martha recognized the type, hard-faced individuals who made their living hunting other men. Elijah Stone, the leader, a thin man with a scraggly beard and cold eyes, called out, "We know you're in there. Come out peaceful-like, and nobody needs to get hurt." "Including the woman?" Elijah called back. "You willing to guarantee her safety?" Murmurs from outside. They hadn't expected a woman. "Well now," the leader said after a pause, "that depends on the woman." "She wanted to?" "She's done nothing wrong," Elijah said firmly. "Then she's got nothing to fear. Send her out, and we can settle this between men." Martha started to protest, but Elijah held up a hand. "You think I'm fool enough to trust bounty hunters?" he called. "You want me, you deal with both of us." The leader laughed, an ugly sound. "Have it your way. Stone, boys. Looks like we do this the hard way." The first shot shattered the window, showering them with splinters. Martha dropped behind the barrel as Elijah had instructed. Her rifle raised. More shots followed, thudding into the thick log walls. "Hold your fire," Elijah murmured. "Let them waste ammunition. We'll need every shot." The barrage continued for several minutes before finally stopping. In the silence that followed, they could hear the men moving, trying to find angles on the cabin. "Stone," the leader called again. "This is foolishness. You're outnumbered, outgunned. Think of the woman, if not yourself." "I am thinking of her," Elijah replied, "thinking she deserves better than being shot down by the likes of you. Nobody wants to shoot a woman. Bad for business, but accidents happen when folks resist." "Go to hell," Martha surprised herself by shouting. Another laugh from outside. "Spirited little thing, ain't she? Tell you what, Stone, you come out, and we'll see the lady get safe passage to the nearest town. That's more than fair." "Your word worth anything?" Elijah asked. "Good as gold when there's profit in keeping it." Elijah looked at Martha. She shook her head violently. "Don't you dare," she hissed. "You walk out there, they'll gun you down, and then they'll come for me anyway." He knew she was right, but she could see the war in his face, the desire to protect her battling with practical reality. The attack came suddenly. Men rushed from 3 directions at once, firing as they came. Elijah's rifle cracked, and one attacker spun and fell. Martha fired through the broken window, her shot going wide but forcing another man to dive for cover. "The roof!" Elijah shouted. Martha looked up to see smoke beginning to curl through the rafters. They'd set fire to the cabin. "Bastards want to smoke us out." Elijah growled, reloading quickly. The smoke thickened rapidly. Soon they were coughing, eyes streaming. The choice became stark: burn or face the guns outside. "Together," Martha gasped through the smoke. "We go together." Elijah nodded, pulling her close for a brief, fierce kiss. "On 3, make for the trees to the north. Don't stop, no matter what." 1, she whispered. 2, he continued. 3, they burst through the door, firing as they ran. The world exploded into chaos. Shouts, gunfire, the baying of dogs. Martha saw a man ahead raise his rifle and fired without thinking. He clutched his shoulder and went down. Something hot creased her arm, spinning her around. Elijah caught her, kept her moving. The trees were so close, just a few more yards. Elijah grunted, stumbling. Blood bloomed across his shirt, not from the old wound but fresh, high on the right side. "No!" Martha got her shoulder under his arm, half dragging him toward the forest. More shots, splinters flying from trees around them. Then they were in the woods, crashing through undergrowth. Behind them, men shouted and dogs howled. "Can't run far," Elijah gasped. Blood soaked his shirt now, his face gray with pain. "The cave," Martha said, remembering his lessons. "The hidden one by the waterfall." It wasn't far, but every step was agony. Elijah leaned heavily on her, his breathing labored. They could hear pursuit crashing through the forest behind them. The cave entrance was barely visible, concealed behind a curtain of hanging moss and the spray from a small waterfall. Martha had to practically carry Elijah the last few yards, both of them soaked by the cold spray. Inside, the cave was dark and narrow, but it opened into a larger chamber farther back. Martha lowered Elijah to the ground, her hands immediately going to his wound. The bullet had passed through, but it was bleeding badly. "Need to stop the bleeding," she muttered, tearing at her petticoat. "Martha." Elijah caught her hand. His grip was weak. "Listen. Don't talk. Save your strength." "Listen." His urgency cut through her panic. "They'll find us. Dogs will track the blood. When they do, then we fight." "No." His hand tightened on hers. "You surrender. Tell them. Tell them I forced you, kidnapped you from the town. They'll believe it." "I won't lie about us," Martha said fiercely. "I won't make what we have into something ugly." "Better ugly than dead. Better dead than without you," she countered. Outside, the sounds of pursuit grew closer. The dogs had found the blood trail. Martha worked frantically, packing the wound, trying to stop the flow of blood. Elijah's face was pale as death, but his eyes remained fixed on hers. "Stubborn woman," he whispered. "You're stubborn woman," she corrected, tears streaming down her face. The baying was just outside now. Any moment, their hunters would find the cave entrance. Martha checked her rifle. 3 shots left. Elijah's gun lay beside him, but she doubted he had the strength to lift it. "I love you," she said, not caring that their first true declaration came now, at what might be the end. "I need you to know that, whatever happens, I love you." "Love you too," he managed. "Worth it. All of it. For these months with you." Shadows fell across the cave entrance. The dogs had arrived, and their masters wouldn't be far behind. Martha raised her rifle, positioning herself between Elijah and the entrance. If this was the end, she'd make them pay dearly for it. But then, unexpected, a new voice from outside, sharp with authority. "That's enough. Stand down, all of you." The dogs went silent. Martha heard arguments, protests, but that authoritative voice cut through them all. A figure appeared at the cave entrance, not one of the bounty hunters, but a man in the uniform of a territorial marshal. He was older, weathered, with keen eyes that took in the scene quickly. "Ma'am," he said, holstering his pistol. "Marshal Wade Hoffman. I think perhaps we should talk." Martha kept her rifle trained on the marshal, her body still shielding Elijah. "Talk about what?" she demanded. "About how you're going to let these vultures murder an innocent man." Marshal Hoffman raised his hands slowly. "Nobody's murdering anyone on my watch, ma'am. Mind if I come in? Your man there looks like he needs help." "You're with them," Martha accused, nodding toward the entrance where the bounty hunters waited. "No, ma'am. I've been tracking them. Got word they were heading into the mountains, hunting without proper authority." He reached slowly into his coat, producing a folded paper. "I carry a federal badge, not territorial, different jurisdiction, different priorities." Behind Martha, Elijah stirred weakly. "Martha," he whispered, let him speak." Against her better judgment, Martha lowered the rifle slightly. Marshal Hoffman entered the cave, moving slowly, keeping his hands visible. He knelt beside Elijah, examining the wound with practiced eyes. "Need to get him to a doctor," he said. "Town of Miller's Crossing is half a day's ride. Got a good sawbones there. So you can hang him when he's healed?" Martha's voice was bitter. "Ma'am, I need you to listen careful like." Hoffman met her eyes directly. 3 weeks ago, A man named Samuel Morrison made a deathbed confession in Denver, admitted to killing Judge Morrison's brother 8 years back, said he'd let another man take the blame, a trapper named Elijah Stone. Martha's heart stopped. What? Morrison was dying of consumption, wanted to clear his conscience, wrote it all out, had it witnessed proper. The real story was about money. The judge's brother had been skimming from mining investments. Morrison found out, threatened to expose him. They fought. Morrison killed him, then pointed the finger at Stone, who'd had the misfortune to find the body. Elijah's eyes had opened fully now, staring at the marshal in disbelief. Morrison confessed, in front of 2 priests and a lawyer. Hoffman confirmed. Of course, the judge didn't want to hear it. Tried to bury the confession, but word got out. Newspapers got hold of it. Federal Marshal Service got involved. He looked back at Martha. I'm here to tell Mr. Stone he's a free man. The warrant's been vacated. Martha felt tears streaming down her face. Tears of relief, of joy, of released tension. He's really free. Free and clear. The bounty's canceled too. These boys outside just haven't gotten word yet. Hoffman's expression hardened. Which is why they're about to be arrested for attempted murder of an innocent man. They burned our cabin, Martha said. Everything we had. That'll be added to the charges. But first, we need to get him to that doctor. Hoffman stood, moving to the cave entrance. Jennings, get in here with medical supplies, and put those guns away. Anyone shoots anyone else. They'll answer to me. The lead bounty hunter appeared, his face sullen. Marshal, we were just about to commit murder. Hoffman cut him off. The warrant on Stone was vacated 3 weeks ago. You boys have been hunting an innocent man. We didn't know. Ignorance isn't a defense. Now get those medical supplies before this man bleeds to death. The next hours blurred together. The bounty hunters, now subdued and facing their own legal troubles, helped fashion a litter for Elijah. Martha stayed by his side as they made the careful journey down the mountain, her hand never leaving his. In Miller's Crossing, the doctor, a competent man named Hartwell, extracted the bullet and stitched the wound properly. He'll live, he announced. Lost a lot of blood, but he's strong. Few weeks of rest and he'll be good as new. Marshal Hoffman took statements from both of them while Elijah recovered. Martha told her own story. The false accusations in Copper Ridge, her flight into the mountains, how Elijah had saved her life. The marshal listened without judgment, occasionally asking clarifying questions. Seems to me, he said when she'd finished, that you two have both been poorly used by the so-called justice system. I'll be having words with the authorities in Copper Ridge about their treatment of you, Miss Caldwell. I don't want to go back there, Martha said quickly. Don't blame you, but they should know the truth, especially about this Thomas Brennan fellow. Hoffman stood, settling his hat. I'll need you both to testify at the bounty hunter's trial, but that won't be for months yet. In the meantime, you're free to go wherever you please. Free. The word seemed impossible. Too good to be real. Martha found Elijah's hand, squeezed it tight. What about our cabin? Elijah asked weakly from the bed. They burned everything. Insurance investigator will assess the damages. You'll be compensated from the bounty hunter's assets. Won't replace the home, but it'll give you a start on building new. After Hoffman left, Martha and Elijah sat in silence, absorbing this reversal of fortune. They were free, both of them. No more running, no more hiding, no more looking over their shoulders. Where do we go now? Martha asked softly. Elijah turned his head to look at her, despite the pallor from blood loss. His eyes were bright. Wherever we want, together. Together, she agreed, leaning down to kiss him gently. They stayed in Miller's Crossing until Elijah was strong enough to travel. The townspeople, having heard their story, treated them with kindness. The local minister even offered to perform a wedding, which they politely declined. For now, there would be time for such things later, when they'd built their new life. On a bright morning in late spring, They stood once more by the frozen creek where they'd first met. The ice was long gone, water running clear and free over the rocks. Their cabin was ashes, but the land remained, and with the compensation from the trial, they could rebuild, better and stronger than before. "No more past to run from," Elijah said, his arm around Martha's waist. "Only future to build." Martha looked up at the mountains that had sheltered them, that had brought them together through hardship and danger. "It won't be easy," she said. "Starting over never is." "No," he agreed. "But we've survived worse, and we've got something now we didn't have before." "What's that?" "Hope," he said simply. "And each other." They stood there as the sun climbed higher. Two souls who'd found love in the wilderness, who'd faced death and injustice and emerged stronger. The frozen creek sang its spring song of renewal, and somewhere in the forest, birds called to their mates. Martha thought of that desperate night when she'd sobbed by these very waters, certain her life was over. How could she have known that her darkest moment would lead to her brightest joy? That the mountain man who'd wrapped her in his arms was saving not just her life, but her heart as well? "Ready?" Elijah asked, preparing to head back to town, to gather supplies, to begin the work of rebuilding. "Ready," Martha confirmed, taking his hand. They walked away from the creek together, leaving the past behind like melting snow. Ahead lay summer, and work, and challenge, but also love, and freedom, and the promise of all the years to come. The mountains stood eternal around them, witness to their story, a tale of two broken people who'd found wholeness in each other, who discovered that sometimes the greatest treasures are found not in gold or comfort, but in the warmth of another's arms against the cold. Cruel world. In the distance, an eagle cried, wheeling free against the endless Montana sky. Martha squeezed Elijah's hand and smiled. They were home. Thank you for listening to this story. Let me know in the comments where you're listening from so we can connect. If you enjoyed this tale from the Wild West, please subscribe to the From Wild West channel and share